Good morning and welcome to our Lent series on being Pontius Pilate's brothers and sisters. We're going to look over the next 6 Saturdays, including this one, the Saturdays in Lent, at Pontius Pilate and what we might learn from him. And it's going to be my contention that we're somewhat related, really, to Pontius Pilate. I want to start with politics, because Pontius Pilate was a politician, of course, part of the local government structure of the Roman Empire. And I want to start with the idea of politics being very often about dithering about trying to please the crowd, about crowd pleasing. And that's not really that surprising, because if you don't please the crowd, then you're not going to get their votes. In Pontius Pilate's case, if you're not going to please the crowd, then you're going to get some local insurrection, and that's going to be very uncomfortable and might get you into trouble back in Rome. Our politicians today, aren't they, are very often accused of dithering. We've heard accusations of dithering of this government, the government we currently have, over the past year, going into lockdowns too late, dithering over that, and dithering about easing up lockdowns. That might be a bit unfair, because most previous governments have been done for dithering one way or another. Think of all the U-turns that David Cameron was accused of. You probably have to go back to Tony Blair and before him, well before him, Margaret Thatcher, to find politicians of really firm convictions who we probably couldn't accuse of dithering for good or bad. But Pontius Pilate all those years ago was very much in the political dithering mode. And we tend to assume that we finish Lent with Pontius Pilate on Good Friday and the interrogation and condemning of Jesus, before he carries his cross to Golgotha. And we tend to think of Pontius Pilate in those circumstances because he's related so firmly to the crucifixion and the cross. But of course we think of the cross on Ash Wednesday, which was just 3 days ago, on this last Wednesday that starts Lent, because usually we have that cross put on our foreheads in ash to remind us of our own mortality. And this year, of course, we weren't allowed to do that, so I painted a cross in ash on this canvas or cotton covering a frame. There it is. And we're going to have that on display by our altar during all the Sundays of Lent up to Good Friday and the Passion. So we talk of walking the way of the cross, that cross that we painted ash on our foreheads on Ash Wednesday. And we talk of walking the way of the cross through Lent until we reach that climactic confrontation with the authorities in Jerusalem, when Jesus confronts those worldly authorities, the Jewish authorities in the temple and the Roman authorities, who are trying to keep the peace and stop any insurrection over that Passover time. And with the whole situation, Pontius Pilate, the local governor in Judea at that time, not a very important figure, a remote outpost of the Roman Empire, he dithers and he delays, like we're familiar with modern politicians. And he stumbles to try and find a solution to the problem that is standing before him in the figure of this itinerant preacher, this troublesome rabbi, this insurgent figure that's accused of sedition in Jerusalem, Jesus of Nazareth. And there in the marbled chambers with the Roman standards hanging, probably little water features playing, robes over couches for Pilate and his officials to rest on. In that incongruous setting stands this scruffy and beaten and bruised figure of Jesus. And Pilate struggles to find a solution. He tries to get out of it. He tries at least twice to free Jesus. He says he can find no fault with him. He tells the crowd that it's not a matter for him, it's a matter for the Jewish authorities. And the situation keeps being thrown back at him. He does his best, really, to find a peaceful solution to it. He could, of course, use his own power and his own decision to free, by tradition, at Passover, one prisoner, and he could make it Jesus. But the crowd insists that it's Barabbas because he puts the choice to the crowd. There's that crowd pleasing again. And then there's the moment when he has, or the moments in the Gospel of John, when he has time on his own with Jesus, the largely silent Jesus, the Jesus that offers him no defense, really. Jesus who doesn't take the opportunity that Pilate gives him to release him, to say that he's not king of the Jews, that he doesn't plan an alternative empire, any of those sort of opportunities that he's given to get out of the situation. At one point, poor Pilate just sort of cries the rhetorical question in frustration, as much as anything else, of what is truth to him? Unaware, of course, of the huge irony of that rhetorical question, what is truth? Because the truth, the eternal truth, that he seeks out of the confusion and chaos of the circumstance that he finds himself in, is standing before him, wholly out of place in the luxury of the marbled chambers and columns around Pilate, wholly out of place, incongruous in that setting, not recognized. Well, that confrontation is well documented in the Gospels, and Pilate's life is examined. We can't know much about Pilate's life. There are Roman historians that record mentions of him. We can't know where he grew up or where he came from, how indeed he specifically got his name. But I commend to you for this Lent and for this series, this book by Anne Rowe called Pilate, the biography of an imagined man. The biography even of an invented man. She draws on all sorts of sources, including medieval mystery plays and the Acta Pilati, better known as the apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus, for information about Pilate and his character and what he's like and where he comes from that she pieces together. And at the end of the story, as far as we're concerned, of Pilate's story in the Passion of Christ, she covers this final great confrontation. And I'm starting today at the beginning of Lent, in this first of our series stages of the series for Lent, at that moment, because in our ends are our beginnings. She records there the extraordinary sort of inversion of power. Pilate represents all that is worldly power, all that is earthly empire power, the most powerful empire on earth at the time, the Roman Empire. All the luxury and trappings and earthly signals and signs of that power. And Jesus, who stands before him, is offering an entire inversion of that. Simple, bound, chained and tied as a prisoner before him. Well, we're going to look a bit at the character of Pontius Pilate, where he came from, what his role in this story of our Gospels truly is. I commend the book to you. Please read and browse through it. There is a chapter in it that I think you'll find particularly fascinating, and if you buy it off Amazon, it's a little under a tenner. You might be attracted by chapter 6, they're all very good, Witness to Christ. But I commend to you the chapter before, The Great Equivocator, because that very much covers the confrontation between Pilate and Christ, from which we can learn so much. But the end of this first little Lent reflection on Saturday mornings, the whole series indeed will remain available to you on our website. But at the end of this opener, I'd just like to draw your attention to a story that a great old friend, rather intimidating friend, rather older than me, Father Lyle Denon, told me. He's as rector at the time of St Andrew's, Holborn in London, which was a sister church and is a sister church of St Bride's, Fleet Street. And he's an archdeacon of Hackney as well. And Lyle used to deliver, Father Lyle delivered a wonderful signature sermon, as it were, called I Am Pontius Pilate's Brother. And it was predicated on the fact that his elder brother, some years older than him, Barry Denon, was an actor. Barry, I see, passed away in 2017, God rest him. But as a young actor, Barry, Father Lyle's elder brother, played the part of Pontius Pilate in the first recording of Jesus Christ Superstar. The first recordings of it, and indeed in the musical, he played Pontius Pilate. And Lyle, who went on to become ordained, and the Father Lyle, the priest that I knew, was still at school, and his headmaster, when he bumped into him, would go, "Ah, if it isn't Pontius Pilate's brother." And Lyle felt that, and has always felt that connection of being Pontius Pilate's brother. And there's something in the equivocation of Pontius Pilate as he stands before Jesus. Read it in the Gospel of John. Read how again and again Pontius Pilate goes back to Jesus in person to ask him further questions, to try and seek a solution, to try and get Jesus to help him, to free him. To free him, how ironic is that? Read it, because it does reveal that extraordinary juxtaposition of earthly and godly power, that inversion of power. And Pilate equivocates, He dithers and he delays. He tries to please the crowd. He tries, standing before Jesus, to understand him. He asks that question, what is truth? Rather like us, really. Rather as we try to make head and tail of this life that we live, of our faith, of the world we live in. We equivocate, we dither, we try to make sense of it all. We stand before God asking, what is truth? Just as Pontius Pilate did. And in that sense, rather like Pontius Pilate, and rather like Father Lyle Denon, teased by his headmaster about his elder brother playing Pontius Pilate, I'd just like to leave you with the thought that we're all Pontius Pilate's brothers and sisters. We're all, in one sense or another, crowd pleasers, seekers of the truth, prevaricators, those who try to throw the towel in, ditherers and delayers, trying to find some sense in the chaos, trying to make the loose ends meet. And over the next few Saturdays, up to the Saturday before Palm Sunday, we're going to think about Pontius Pilate and the kind of decisions that he'd had to make in life, how he got probably where he was in that situation, what happened to him afterwards, and see how that matches our lives today as we try to make sense of them, as we try to acknowledge that we're Pontius Pilate's brothers and sisters. See you next time. I expect you want to get out into the relative warmth and sunshine. I think it's going to hit 15 degrees today on this Saturday. So I probably delayed you too long. I'll see you next time. And we'll build this library of 6 little Lent addresses to consider in Lent together. Look forward to when we can meet again in person. And I hope tomorrow I might see one or two of you at church, since one or two of us are allowed back to church, under safe clinical conditions, of course. Hope to see you then, and meanwhile, every blessing of Lent. God bless.